considerable amount of time, and it is my tremendous honor and privilege to be here on these unceded and stolen ancestral territory of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam people. As we're waiting for some folks to come in, I know that we have a full house tonight, which is so remarkable. I'm impressed with how many of you all have decided to take the time out of your lives to get into this conversation today. And it is a conversation certainly that's happening all around the globe. And we have an incredible panel of activists and organizers and academics and educators and leaders who are taking action every single day on the front line of anti-Black racism, both here in Canada and how it manifests all around the world. I'm excited to have this conversation, and we now know that the webinar is streaming live on Facebook. So hello, Facebook, all of you on Facebook. Thank you for joining us for Feminists Deliver Resistance and Resurgence, Confronting Anti-Black Racism in Canada. As we're kind of waiting for people to come in, I want to introduce beloved Rhiannon Bennett, of Musqueam territory, Musqueam Nation, who, among other fabulous things and leadership that she shows all around in her work, is the decolonization consultant for Feminists Deliver. Hey, Rhiannon.
Hey, Angela. Hi, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here today. Aitna Swallowan Z Quitsnala, Antha Rhiannon, Talitna Humathquiam. My dear friends and relatives, it gives me really good feelings to see you all here today, and I'm coming to you all today from the Tsawwassen lands. And I am a proud member of the Musqueam Indian Band. And I'm really grateful for Angela for inviting me in to share some space with these amazing, powerful folks today. And I'm so incredibly in awe of how many people in such short notice have made time in their day to come and listen to everybody. And I'm really humbled to be here because it's such an important time now to be talking about Black lives and to be talking about anti-Blackness. But it's really hard for me to sort of pull apart anti-Blackness from anti-Indigenous, because there's so much connection between the two, and it's really hard to fight one without fighting the other one, because that common thing that creates both of those anti things is white supremacy. So when we come together and stand together as Natsamat, as with one heart and one mind, we really are stronger together. And I've been reflecting a lot on 2020 has been such a powerful year for people becoming really aware of a lot of the systemic racism in our society. The year started off with Shut Down Canada, which happened to fall during Black History Month. So here we are in Indigenous History Month, talking about Black Lives Matter. So it just really speaks to, how prevalent these two issues are, and how they're sort of used against each other. There's a lot of people who pit our two communities against each other. I've been hearing a lot of rhetoric lately about how people should be grateful to be living in Canada. And it's really sort of quite disturbing, like listening to Canadians talk about how we should be grateful that we don't have it as bad down the States. And then they use, to try and silence Black people, they use the genocides that are happening here to silence Black people, that they shouldn't be so upset because they don't have it as bad as the Indigenous folks. And then, and that just really upsets me whenever I see that. Like, don't use the genocide against my people to justify the anti-Blackness that happens in Canada too. And it's almost sort of like this flip-flop at the border, where south of the border, Indigenous folks are so invisible. Their voices are so quiet and so pushed to the back. And Black folks are very, very visible. but then you skip over that imaginary line and it sort of does a little bit of a flip-flop where the Indigenous voice becomes a little bit stronger and more visible and more prominent, and the Black voice gets sort of silenced and fragmented. So it's, and I'm not pointing out these things sort of like, because I'm tired of people trying to have us compare who has it worse. Because nobody has it worse. All of the atrocities that are happening to the Indigenous communities and to the Black communities, it doesn't matter. They're atrocities, and they shouldn't be. There's no comparing. There's no medal for who suffered the most. So I'm really keen sort of to listen today, because it's not often that we have in Canada a panel like this of strong Black voices coming together to talk. So I'm really happy and grateful to have been included a little bit in today, and just sort of reminding everybody of our connection, and how we really are stronger together, and how we need to be lifting each other up, and people need to stop pitting us against each other, because I'm really tired of it. I'm really tired of being told that I should be grateful that I'm not Black, or that Black people should be grateful they're not Indigenous. Like that, we need to stop doing that, and we need to be shoulder to shoulder. So much love to all of you. There's a big audience today. Take a deep breath, and we're gonna blow some minds, and some great things are gonna come, because as all these little ripples are coming together, it's just gonna make such a bigger and bigger wave, and things are gonna change, because frankly, they have to change, because I'm tired of going to funerals, and I'm tired of watching bodies on the ground. So much love, and I'm going to pass the floor back over to Angela, and I will see you at the end to wrap things up, I believe is our plan. So,
Great.
yeah.
Thank you, Rhiannon. Thank you for that. And yes, it's true that our struggles as Black people are intertwined with the liberation and sovereignty struggles of Indigenous people all across the Americas and around the world. And we are centering Black voices here today, and Black people, and it's a part of our work, certainly at Feminists Deliver, which we started, we came together on account of the Women Deliver conference that you may recall that Canada hosted in 2019. And Feminists Deliver came together as a grassroots collaboration of folks that are based primarily in the province that we now call British Columbia, of Two-Spirit people, non-binary folks, Indigenous queer, trans women, lesbian women, and cis women and girls, and all the organizations that support them to come together to, at that time, to host a conference back in June. And that conference was to offer an alternative to what was Women Deliver, to bring a intersectional and decolonial anti-oppression lens that was to look at our struggles through the intersections, and grounding ourselves in understanding the role of colonization as it is manifest and continues to manifest here in Canada, but all around the world. And it's certainly been at the heart of Black people's experiences, those of us as we all trace our ancestry to Africa. And we have more than 30 member organizations who make up our coalition. As mentioned, our approach is intersectional, it is decolonial, and it is anti-oppression. And when we talk about intersectional feminism, we give a shout out always to the wonderful work of Professor Kimberly Crenshaw, who in 1989 formed that term, coined that term officially, though of course, as Black feminists, as Black people, we have always been working from an intersectional point of view in our lives. As you continue to come in, I just want everyone to know that we've got closed captioning services here today. And thank you to Tamara from the National Captioning Canada for providing this service. And you can activate it by clicking on the closed caption button on your screen. We acknowledge, of course, that we are talking in a colonial language, that language being English. And we aspire always to host these webinars in various languages because we really recognize that language should not be a barrier to accessing information. And we are limited, certainly as a grassroots organization, and it's challenging to provide accurate and good information in other languages other than English. We also acknowledge that we are using the internet, and tools to tune in this way are the result of privilege. and that we're doing the best we can to take in this situation, and we recognize that the internet should be a utility and not a luxury item. We think it's a vital form of communication and it should be accessible to all. At the same time, as we're centering Black people here, we recognize that we are, this platform that we're using is used on devices that have been created as the result of the extraction of minerals from Africa and the subjugation and exploitation of labor, of Black people's labor, African labor, and in particular children. And it is a result of having access to these minerals that we are able to see each other today with these on our devices. The next 2 hours or so, we will have this conversation with some amazing panelists. And we are asking that non-Black people who are here, and thank you for your interest and for taking the time to be here, and that we want you to witness and to decenter yourself. And we are not seeking comments or questions. We're providing a number of different ways to continue doing that reach out, your own research outside of this discussion. We've been really fortunate to have Justine Ramirez, who is our communication specialist at Feminists Deliver, who has put together a number of resources and is sharing those through our social media channels. And also this webinar is recorded, so you will get a copy of it, as well as all of the resources that our brilliant panelists have convened and that have been convened by Black people around this time. And we've got Facebook Live happening. So again, hello, Facebook. And we ask that you refrain from commenting as well. We want you to take the time to bear witness and to hear from our panelists. And along the same lines as we're asking to bear witness and to take the time to take in this information, we're really asking that you not live tweet or post to social media. We are living a very highly distracted time where we're multitasking in a number of different ways, and we ask that you take a moment and for the next few moments and pause on live tweeting and sharing through social media. And without further ado, I must introduce our beloved panelists. And I would like to start with, we've got the fortune that we have many generations of organizers and activists. I'd like to start with Dr. Yvonne Brown and acknowledge her brilliant work. She has reinvented herself as a writer and a historian after 39 years in the education system. And working in 2010, 2011, she completed her postdoctoral fellowship. And through that, she worked did her studies through the Harriet Tubman Institute for Research on Global Migration of African Peoples. Incredible work. She's written books and papers and has a tremendous wealth of knowledge and to share here today. Please, Dr. Brown, please, Yvonne Brown, please wave for everyone so we can see you. Wonderful. I'd like to introduce Cicely Blain, who many of you know through their incredible work as a consultant, facilitator, writer, and artist based in Vancouver. Growing up in London, England, Cicely graduated from the University of British Columbia with a major in modern European studies and minor in Russian language, and has been passionate in being involved in the global community, making meaningful change in the lives of marginalized people. And as a queer person of mixed heritage, Cicely talks about how it's always been important to stand up for those who experience discrimination and oppression in schools, the workplace, and society at large. Cicely's passion started as a youth, as a teenager, and Cicely's been incredible in winning an $8 million grant from the British government to build a community center for young people in poor urban environments. Hard work and incredible leader. Please, Cicely, wave to everybody. Denise Goldberg is our next panelist. And Denise is a first-generation Canadian who was born in Ontario, Ottawa, Ontario, of Afro-Caribbean parents. Her mother, Doreen, is a retired nurse from Kingston, Jamaica, the Jamaica in the house. Her father worked in mortgage and as a specialist, and was born in Kingston. And what's really wonderful is that Denise was our sound engineer at Feminists Deliver in the last summer, and dedicated her time to amplifying marginalized voices on community radio as a producer and host. Please welcome Denise Fraser. And please allow me to introduce June Francis. Dr. June Francis is the Director of Institute of the Diaspora Research and Engagement at Simon Fraser University, where she is an Associate Professor at the Beatty School of Business and the co-founder of the Laboratorio Project, which works to strengthen collaboration and learning and innovation for more diverse and inclusive, resilient solutions in governance, policy, and industry practice. As co-chair of the Hogan's Alley Society and board of director, she leads an organization whose mission is to advance the social, political, and economic, cultural well-being of people in the African descent through delivery of housing, built spaces, and programming. Please give us a wave if you don't mind, Dr. Francis. Thank you. Junie Désil works currently in Vancouver's downtown east side on the unceded ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and lives in Quaqait in New Westminster, juggling writing and life. Give us a wave, please, Junie, if you don't mind. Excellent. And finally, please allow me to acknowledge Natasha Tony, who is the CEO of Elevate Inclusion Strategies. She's a trained mediator and experienced labor relations specialist who has advanced the discussion on how to build inclusive organizations, bringing keen sense of fairness and sensitivity to intersectionality, going beyond diversity, setting up organizations for true inclusion and respect for all members. Hey, Natasha. So we've had some chances that we had a chance over the last while to convene ourselves and to talk about tonight and what matters to us right now at this time. And I would like to ask the panel if you would be willing to share some insights and what you're noticing right now at this vital time of engagement on anti-Black racism. And I wonder if I may start with June.
Hi, Angela, and hi, everyone, and thank you for those wonderful words to start the conversation, and apologize because I waved when you said Yvonne, so I'm June. I was waving to Yvonne, but realized Dr. Brown. I'm so glad so many of you are here to talk about this, because this, of course, has been an interesting time, a difficult time, and yet a heartening time at the same time. Difficult because as Black people in Canada, we continue to have to justify our existence. We continue to have to defend our positions. We continue to have to make a claim and remind Canadians that slavery existed in this country. We take on this burden of always having to say that Canada, we always have to be compared, as was said earlier, to the United States. So it's good to have this wonderful moment to just share with a Black panel and to have everybody here. But I will say, so it's been very difficult to watch us at this juncture again and again and again and again. But what I'm heartened to see recently is the fact that I think the white population, the wider population, is starting for the first time, I think, to recognize that they need to move beyond simply showing up for rallies to actually making a difference in terms of making contributions to, for example, Hogan's Alley Society. But I've also noticed commitment here today to listen to these conversations. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, June. Cicely, thoughts, reactions?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this moment and how exactly as Dr. June Francis says, it's, you know, Black folks have been talking about these issues for years, decades, centuries, and of course it feels like a really powerful moment. It feels incredible that folks are tuning in, that people are hopefully putting putting money behind their words, and I'm so curious to see if this is long term, if this is something that will be sustainable, if people will still be engaging with and supporting Black communities moving forward. And to me it's always so well, for want of a better word, so sad that Black folks have to die for for our voices to be recognized. And that's something that I take to heart very, very dearly as I continue to do my work, that I cannot, we could not have the platform that we have now. We would not have 3,000 people, listening to us now if it wasn't for Black folks across Turtle Island and across the globe experiencing really disproportionate rates of violence.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Cicely. Natasha, I know that you've been thinking about this.
Yes, thank you, and hello, everyone. I think that I've been thinking about it, and probably throughout my answers, talking about both the personal and professional piece of it. And I am heartened by how many activists that I have come across that are messaging me and checking in with me and wanting that support. And I remember having a connection with somebody on the front lines in Los Angeles, a young actor who is from Canada but is on the front lines, and being able to plug in with community, not unlike what we're doing with one another today. Having the gratitude to be able to reach out and build those connections and strengths with people on the front lines. It warms me that that is happening, but I also am realizing the impact of folks on the front lines and the impact that it is having on their soul. And I think about grief, and I've been talking about grief, and I've been talking about that personally and understanding where I'm at in it. But I'm seeing grief play out in the workplace. I'm seeing it played out in isolation because we're in a pandemic as well. And so that people are away from their loved ones, friends and family. And so that it is really extremely important that we continue to build those connections and actually take some of those quiet moments for ourselves to recharge and renew, because the fight isn't going anywhere. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Natasha. Yes, the fight isn't going anywhere. And Dr. Brown, you've been in this fight for a while now. Reactions to what's happening currently? We really want to hear you, and I think you just need to unmute your mic.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yes, I've been in this a very long time, and what I am observing in the most recent happenings is the rise of leadership among young Black women. It really gives me great pleasure to see all of you who are my daughter's age stepping up and providing a different framework for inclusion. And I like to name whom I'm talking about. The three young women who founded Black Lives Matter: Patrice Kahn-Collars, Alicia Garza, and Opal to Meti. I don't think that they understood when they started, but they were driven as young women by what they saw, and like their mothers and grandmothers before them, they had to act. And here they invented the slogan, Black Lives Matter, for which they got a lot of ridicule and so on. But look at what that movement has, how it has grown. And at this critical moment when the rage, I see this as a moment where the rage of over 500 years has really spilled over. And here is the ideas of these three young women that became the banner under which people could mobilize. I think that is huge, really huge. And I look around me and I see the leadership of Black women everywhere. It gave me great pleasure to see the mayor of Washington, D.C. stand up to Trump. And you see what she has done. She has ordered the guard out of her city. She's renamed a street, Black Lives Matter Street. And she's painted the street yellow. So I think that, you know, and I want to say to the next generation, do carry along with you the names of people like Rosemary Brown from BC. And all of you in BC know who she is. She influenced me as a young woman, and she has left a great big legacy for BC, Canada, and the world. So I just want to focus on the Black women leadership for what I am noticing, and we have it here in Canada as well. The young woman who's written, is it Robin Maynard? What's her book called again? Policing Black Lives. Incredible work. So I do have a son too, and I'm not excluding him, but I take this moment considering women have been oppressed and kept out of the limelight for so long. They've stepped forward and they've taken the mic, and here we come.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. Yeah, what do you think, Junie? How do you make sense of the current moment where African people are making visible our shared struggle, both here in Canada, but all around the world?
Yeah, I mean, I have to be honest, there's a simultaneous feeling of being heartened, you know, feeling that this is it, we are here, we're speaking up, speaking out. And then there's that moment of like, this is like Groundhog Day, you know, where we see this over and over, we reach a critical moment, something atrocious happens, and here we are again, speaking up, speaking out, reminding people that this is an issue. You know, we're not making this up. We exist. We are here, and so balancing that in this juncture, this desire to really feel like something is happening, something will change, while recognizing that for me, who's 41, and I don't feel my age, whatever that means, but you know, moving here to BC when I was 19, and wanting to get involved in various anti-racist movements in BC, and to be here again, seeing that, you know, once again, here we are. But I have to say, and as Rhiannon said when Rhiannon introduced us or opened, being on a panel with all Black folks who've done incredible work is actually quite uplifting and heartening, and knowing that here we are talking in this forum and space. I think that will keep me going for now, certainly through the grief and the rage. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Denise, I know that we've had this conversation. What would you like to let the viewers know about what you're thinking right now?
Oh yes, well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, perfect. I'm heartened to see that across the border there has been movement for over 12 days. People have taken to the streets across the country, basically, and they're outraged. So it's great to see that the movement is actually, it's going every day, and they're not going to stop. But I just feel like, it's energizing. So I'm feeling great to see that they're doing their best. But yeah, there is a long way to go. So thank you.
One of the key facets of being Black in Canada is our heightened visibility, because there's so few of us, and then our relative experience and of invisibility, and in our numbers, the population, the ways in which we've been displaced in our neighborhoods, and the immigration policies in Canada. But I'm interested in hearing from you, June, what you think about the differences between Canada and, let's say, the United States, and the ways in which anti-Black racism manifests.
Sorry, I laugh a little bit because obviously that is a question that comes up over and over again. And so I'm going to start by at least talking about the ways in which they're identical. Slavery existed in Canada as it existed in the United States. It was the same slavery. It was chattel slavery. We were bought, we were sold, we were owned. We were given Christian names to erase our history and our past. Ownership of slaves continued until 1834 in terms of emancipation. And the first slaves arrived on the shore in the 1600s. So I just wanted to make sure that the logic becomes the same. But what's really interesting, from the very beginning in Canada, Canadians tended to somehow always compare what their anti-Black racism and policies as being somehow more benign than the Americans. Somehow using the Americans as a standard, and then saying that we're just a little bit better, in some ways more insidious, some ways much subtler, a kinder version, apparently. Some people would say a more subtle, more under the surface, more difficult to grab a hold of version. But we had segregation as well. And to this day, I just wanted to bring it to contemporary society. The United Nations visited Canada in 2017 and had a scathing report about the status of Canadians, of Black Canadians, and of the failure of Canadian society to address the anti-Black racism going back to its historical roots. And so this is 2017 when this report came out. It affects us in a contemporary way. We're excluded from many things. We're erased from many things. Our work goes unacknowledged and unacclaimed. We have a list of things that we could go into. So for now, I think that it's really important, whether one is more in your face or less in your face, the impact on our children and who we are and our role in the society has been detrimental, negative in most respects. And so this question about the comparison, perhaps it's the wrong one, of course. The one is about what is happening actually among us. Thank you, Angela.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so certainly the mythologies of Canada as the quote-unquote promised land and the end of the Underground Railroad certainly ignore the realities of white supremacist oppression that Black people experience in Canada, have long experienced. Cicely, I know in your work and in your presentations and supporting individuals and organizations around this through your teaching, how do you make sense of this difference between Canada and the United States and other parts of the world, for that matter.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the workshops that we offer is called Unlearning Anti-Blackness, and it gives people the tools to be able to identify anti-Black racism in their workspaces, in their communities. And one of the things that's most important to me is to help people to understand those histories, and how, you know, going further off of what June was saying, to those things are so intentional. I think oftentimes people think it's sort of accidental, that something's been forgotten, or that something's been, you know, dropped off the wayside, but actually it's very much on purpose that Black history, anti-Blackness within history specifically, has been erased from the Canadian consciousness of what it means. And Canada has done an incredible job at maintaining and crafting an image of being peaceful, of being the, as you say, the end of the Underground Railroad, of accepting Holocaust survivors, of accepting refugees, and creating this narrative that Canada can do no wrong. And I think, you know, when you look at some of those pieces, some of those anti-Black pieces in history, they've been so intricately hidden within legislature. Like, a couple of things that come to mind for me is, you know, a lot of the segregation laws were less overt than they were in the United States, and they were sort of written in a way where schools were segregated by religious lines, for example, but obviously there was a racial underpinning to that, or there was an attempt to ban Black immigration to Canada in the early 1900s, but it was sort of hidden under these like intricate sort of legal jargon, so that when you try to look for it, on face value, you don't see anti-Blackness in Canadian history. And so it really requires this intentional effort to like scour away at a whitewashed history.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and part of that history is also the idea that our experience begins with our enslavement. And what we know is that we had rich and vital communities prior to colonization and prior to our enslavement and the transport to the Americas. And I'm wondering, Dr. Brown, what you think Canadians, should be teaching themselves about the enslavement of Africans, both broadly, but then also Africa in general, historically, and then here in Canada.
Well, I want to take off on what Cicely just said, is about whitewashing the history and omitting and so on. I would like to coin a word and say what we want to start to do is to blackwash that whitewashed history. And we want to revisit everything that we've learned in school and look at what is omitted, what is distorted, look at the language that's been used to describe Africans. Just the label Black that we are all using is so problematic. That the word is available in all the Western European colonizers' language. At the time of enslavement, the Portuguese said negra. Then comes the Spanish with what it is in Spanish. The French had them, and you can go down the line. The Germans, all of them have a name in their vocabulary, in their language for Black and Black-skinned people. And with that one word alone, they've erased ethnic identities, clans, political geographies, cultures. And that word gave them license to demonize and dehumanize people with Black skin. And we're living the heritage of that. So in terms of, there's a slave trade, but there's also the recruitment of Black people as cheap labor. We couldn't come to this country once without being categorized as a domestic servant for women, and for men it was working in the fields, fruit picking. So the big picture, when I just mentioned the Portuguese, the French, the Spanish, is that there are ports on the eastern seaboard of Canada that are directly linked to the worldwide trade. St. John's, Newfoundland, Halifax, Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. What's the other one? Help me out here. All those seaport towns were involved in the commodity mass production and export of the commodities produced in the tropics. So rum and molasses and sugar came to Newfoundland and Nova Scotia. It even came to BC in the sugar refinery there in BC. And these eastern seaboard ports are connected to those in the United States, Charlotte, Boston, all of those big slave trading ports, and go right back to ports in Europe, Glasgow, Bristol, and boy, am I happy to see Colston come down this weekend. Oh my goodness, am I glad. Bristol, what's the other one called again? There, London, of course. That dinky little river Thames, when I saw it, I could not believe that so much trade happened in that little snake of a river. But it did carry a lot of trade in African bodies, in commodities, and on the landscape in each of these port cities in Canada, the US, the Americas, the Caribbean, there are the ruins and not so ruins of all of these places, in the administration buildings, in what's left on the ports, even the old signs of slave days and the trade in these commodities there. So I forgot what I started out to answer. Help me out here, Angela. What was the question again?
Well, I think you covered a lot in giving a history lesson, which we know is rendered invisible, and we also know that non-Black people tend not to
it was
investigate.
About slavery. Yes. So let's get serious and start reading. And when we visit these cities, while we celebrate and admire all this thing, look on the landscape for the markers of this trade and this connection. Codfish, Newfoundland, rum, molasses, okay. Even the rum running trade that between the bootlegging that went on between Nova Scotia and the US, that's all tied in together. And the shipbuilding in Prince Edward Island. You know why Prince Edward Island is so denuded and only potatoes grow there now? Because they cut down all the lumber to build the ships. And many of them were slave ships and man-of-war ships, etc. So this enterprise is huge. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, we cannot, it certainly wasn't a small little enterprise. It was a massive economic driver for Europe. And if we think about present day capitalism and what it means in terms of wealth, that the economic system has been based on the enslavement of Africans, and of course that that free labor, that enslaved labor, combined with moving indigenous people off the lands, and it's quite remarkable to see Black people rising in the European countries, the colonial countries, and drawing attention to this global reality that we're all experiencing right now. And and we've hearing a lot about anti-Black racism. Of course, we're talking about confronting that here today in Canada. And we can't talk about anti-Black racism really without really talking about white supremacy. Isn't the problem more akin to white supremacy, Junie?
I mean, I guess when we talk about white supremacy, we have to also understand that anti-Blackness is what grounds or centers this white supremacy, and that anti-Blackness guides the structural reality that we live in, and that to the larger society, something you said earlier, Angela, is that Blackness is inextricably tied to white supremacy's assertion that it's slaveness. And so while chattel slavery ended
both in Canada and the US. As you said, it marks our ontological position. And so since white supremacy is irrevocably tied up with anti-Blackness, our culture, our way of living, our state, our superstructures support this viewpoint that our Black lives don't matter, both in myriad ways, small and big, and that these are both conscious and unconscious, intentional and unintentional, but that our systems are driven by this white supremacist assertion. And so here, what's currently known as Canada, we're not immune to that. It is both white supremacy and anti-Blackness that allows Canada to extirpate and obscure the experience and history of Black people in Canada, to obscure the fact that chattel slavery existed, that Canada had segregated schools, that Canada only speaks of racism in the context of the US. And what allows Canada, so this white supremacy business, also allows Canada to remain smug while participating in resource extraction, genocide, theft of Indigenous lands, all the while disavowing our existence. So we're this absented presence in this structure. So you can't talk about one really without the other.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we have been, kind of putting forward this idea that as a result of colonization and the role of European colonization was to impart an ideology of white superiority, European superiority, and wherever colonists went around the world, bringing a belief system that they were encountering folks that were not human, that were of a lesser species, that were savage, that were more akin to animal or fauna, and that the idea of superiority and the whiteness in terms of European features are central in that. And I know, Natasha, that we've had these conversations about the role of white supremacy. Thoughts, reactions to how it is a factor and maybe the factor in terms of anti-Black racism?
Yeah, I've been thinking about racism as a disease, because that is the conversation that often I'm hearing the news cycle talk about, the pandemic of racism. And so racism as a disease, and if white supremacy is the addiction, I'm curious to know if we've hit rock bottom. And if this is something where we're starting to make a shift in understanding. But when we talk about white supremacy, when we talk about institutional and structural racism, and even when we downplay it to the 101 to do diversity training, I can see how folks want to grip and hold on to white supremacy, even without being able to name it, that when we start to suggest that we have equal rights, that we have a right to be here and to talk about our history, we are continuously silenced. Right? And so when that plays out in the workplace, at school, that white supremacy is something that I think that many are wanting to hold on to and don't want to look at what it would look like to dismantle and to truly have us have a conversation, a transformative conversation around what the world needs to look like.
Mm-hmm. And that is in part why we want to, I guess, also highlight anti-Black racism, is the how different it is, the difference in manifestation of the particular version of hatred that Black people experience, and then how that's individual, but it's also structural. And it is also, when I said earlier about the role of colonization, and in particular the role of religion and the idea of a gender binary and the imposition of a gender binary, and how much that is a part of our everyday belief, and that there are two genders, and that and on the front line of it's been only a recent phenomena where we've been putting gender into a binary. For many communities prior to colonization and people, there were not specific gender pronouns. And that is a new piece. And so I know, Cicely, that you are doing a lot in your activism around this, and what matters to you most about unpacking gender within white supremacy and anti-Black racism.
Absolutely, as you say, like, I believe that the gender binary is a specific tool of white supremacy that has served to further delineate, subjugate, and marginalize folks of color, especially Black folks. You know, if we look back through history, there's so many times when the gender binary has been used in very intentional ways to divide and further oppress Black folks, regardless of their gender, and specifically because of their gender. You know, if we think about slavery and the difference between the way that Black male slaves and Black female slaves were utilized in very specific gendered ways, and how that then, you know, how that then filters through into the present day, and the very harmful and detrimental stereotypes about Black folks and how they are specifically gendered. You know, how when we're thinking about, you know, of course we're here for this conversation that's specifically addressing police brutality and police violence, and a lot of the reason why it's Black men who we're specifically seeing in the majority of the folks impacted by that is the specific narrative of Black men as dangerous, as criminal, as barbaric, and a lot of these stereotypes and narratives haven't shifted. And then, of course, when we add the layer of intersectionality of Black women and the introduction of, you know, sort of an evolution, one of the great evolutions of the Black Lives Matter movement is the evolution to include the Say Her Name campaign, for example, and a recognition that Black women's voices and Black femme voices have been erased from the conversation. And I think, it's very, very crucial for us to have this intersectional lens within a pro-Black movement. You know, and you see a lot of things of people saying, if you're homophobic, you're not pro-Black. If you're transphobic, you're not pro-Black. And what that means is this is a movement for all Black life and for all Black folks. And we have to recognize the ways that white supremacy has specifically targeted Black communities through a gendered lens, and how unfortunately we as Black folks have also internalized a lot of that in terms of how we then as people, not just Black folks, as people in general, we become obsessed with the gender binary, and we think it's the only defining feature of who we are as humans. And that, as I say, leads to the over-criminalization of Black men, and then also the over-sexualization and violence and fetishization of Black women and femmes. And so then where does that leave Black non-binary people, right? If we have these very, very stringent, stereotyped binary categories of gender, there's no room for fluidity within that, which is, as you say, very sad given the pre-colonial histories of gender fluidity in Africa, but also here on Turtle Island as well.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that insight. And the term people of marginalized genders has been one that we've been starting to use increasingly. What do you think of that term, if I may ask, Cicely, that idea of, in terms of understanding ways in which white supremacy and anti-Black racism kind of is a feature in, and how that term could be a useful term in understanding our experiences?
Yeah, I think it's a useful term because I think it's helpful for us to move away from, you know, often there's so many amazing resources and services that are specifically dedicated towards women. And that comes from the recognition that women experience, you know, more gender-based violence in our society than men do. However, that of course means that folks who live outside of the binary are then left out of those conversations. So I appreciate the term marginalized genders kind of speaks to anybody who's not a cisgender man, basically, and allows us to kind of define a group and recognize that, recognize that folks who are not cisgender men, whether they're cis women or whether they're non-binary or whether they're trans women, are experiencing intersectional layers of gendered violence.
Thank you. And we thank Junie and your work and activism and in supporting and being on the front line on the war on folks, people of marginalized genders.
I missed the first part, but I'm assuming that I'm just going to answer similarly.
Yeah, just I know through your work and being on that front line, you know, supporting folks of marginalized genders.
Yeah, you know, here's the thing. I mean, here we are doing this work, and it continually evolves as we also continually evolve and you know, become more inclusive or unlearn, you know, the white supremacy, heteropatriarchal, cisgender stuff. And, you know, I want to introduce this term, and it might seem a bit bigger than like talking about where I'm working, and that's the term of, you know, the necropolitical, in that, you know, we operate in this political economy of nation building, you know, that centers pretty much the death, neglect, isolation, and murder of folks, of Black folks, and in this case, in this conversation, of folks of marginalized genders. And so in doing this, what you see is that the state allows for inciting state-sanctioned violence, neglect, murder that targets folks who are non-binary. And you see this when you look at the news. Like, yes, the news is rife with the death of, you know, Black men. And you see tiny columns or nothing regarding Black folks of marginalized genders, and this persists, and this is not by accident. And so I think that when we are unpacking gender within white supremacy and anti-Black racism, we have to understand that this politics of discarding those that don't fit in this superstructure is central to, or needs to be central to how we operate and continue to liberate everyone in this movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we were talking the other day about a tweet that, and I haven't been able to find it, but it was I was looking for it. It was very powerful in the wording through our conversation the other day, and that was the part that that the health system treats, in this case, Black women as bad as police treat Black men. And thinking about the role of motherhood and how the ways in which anti-Black racism impacts Black mothers. Denise, you're a mother. Comments about how your understanding of white supremacy and anti-Black racism on Black motherhood.
Yes, I can speak to that with personal experience. I actually I was in the hospital for a colon surgery, and just waking up out of the anesthesia, I was telling the nurses that I hadn't gotten the pain medication that I needed, and I repeated myself multiple times, and I was actually told I did receive it when I didn't. When I was about to leave the recovery area, the nurse apologized and said, "Sorry, I just noticed that you had not received any pain medication." So that was a really stark reminder of how, like, being in the hospital as a Black woman, you can't even advocate for yourself. I'm still taken aback, and I'm not sure if I need to take some legal action, but still, it's really disheartening. And as a mother, just looking after and looking out for my children, making sure that I'm advocating for them in the school system, making sure that, they're not just pinpointed because of the color of their skin. It's always one of the things that's on top of my mind 24/7. So thank you for asking.
Yeah, and Dr. Brown, I know that this has been one of the key parts of your efforts, and writing is about Black motherhood and how anti-Black racism is a major factor in the lives of Black mothers. What comes to mind today as we're unpacking anti-Black racism and white supremacy? And you might want to take your mic there, because we want to hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now? Several things come to mind, but I'm going to start by making a space for George Floyd's mother and to say her name. And one of the reasons it struck me that in his last moments, he cried out, "Mama, Mama, I am finished," or "I am through." And what struck me is the primordial connection of mother and children. George's mom had died 2 years ago, and he's about to die, and he calls for his mother. And I know that feeling because I grew up without a mother. I don't know my mother. When I was having my first child on the labor table by myself in the throes of pain, no one was around. I never knew my mother, but I called out, "My mother, my mother, my mother." It is very, very difficult for me to watch on the Canadian scene, especially those images of the mothers holding their bellies and crying each time one of their children has been shot and killed. She witnesses her own flesh and blood being blown up. It is very difficult. And then the mothers go to school to advocate for their children, and they're often treated with the utmost disrespect and disregard. I put 3 children through the system, and I can tell you that even though I was a professional with all the labels behind my name, dressed in my pinstripe suit and my briefcase, when I arrived at the school, in some teacher's eye, who is that? She was a nobody. You know? And the things that my children came home and told me that some of their beloved teachers said to them, because of the power structure and how it's stacked against women and children in the school system. And for the safety of my children, many times I just cried myself to sleep because the abuse was so bad that even though I had the mouth, I had the knowledge, but in the face of institutions that are so stacked against these Black mothers and their children. And I'm not discounting the fathers, but any problem there is at school, they used to say, "Where's the mother?" If the mother was doing X, Y, and Z, the mother bashing is just astounding. And so I was thinking, you know, the history in relation to enslavement of African women on this side of the world and throughout the Western European empires. They were used for their labor. They were used for their reproductive function. Their children were given the status of slave and owned. The names that were called, like breeding wenches. The women, they were open to rape by the masters and his sons, and that's the stuff of which Southern fiction is made. The rape the gratuitous rape of Black women and Black mothers, and the turning of young daughters into mothers when they're still in their teenage years. And to think that there was a time during slavery when the law said a Black woman wasn't capable of being raped. Just think about that. And that mentality is brought forward today. And just before I wrap up, I want to say, look, George, to say her name, George Floyd's mother's name is Larcenia Floyd. And there is a beautiful photo of her and George, it's online, with this little boy around 6 years old sitting in her lap being cuddled. So when he cries, "Mama, I'm through," that picture says to us behind, George Floyd was Larcenia's beautiful baby, and she loved him unconditionally. And she witnessed, her spirit witnessed from the grave, the awful taking of the life she gave him.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Brown. Yeah, this front line, where our bodies are on this front line of hate. And the front lining is also in institutions. It's in academia, it's in schools, it's in the health system. Dr. June Francis, you've been crystal clear in your analysis and critique of institutional anti-Black racism. Tell us what you're thinking right now about the ways that it manifests and how we advance our liberation within these institutions.
Listening to Dr. Brown, I must say that my heart is still racing as I couldn't but help relive everything she was describing about the impact of institutional racism and what that impact means on a personal level to each of our lives. And I'm struggling to go back to the bigger picture, but I will. So thank you for that. And you see, one of the things that I think we need to move this conversation in certain ways, and one of the ways is when we say anti-Black racism, we sometimes put the focus on ourselves, but we forget that people are anti-us, standing on top of us. They're gaining. White supremacy is meaning that institutions, all organizations in this country, the history has been one that puts white culture, white individuals, and all that it means to be white in a privileged position. It's an advantage to whites. So the disadvantage to us is not benign. It's not a level. They're gaining advantage. These institutions. When you look at, and the proof is in their structures. If you look at the university that I'm a part of, Simon Fraser University, and you look at its senior administration, I challenge you to do that to every institution across this country. If you look at the makeup of the corporate boards, if you look at the makeup of nonprofit organizations boards, institutions that should be the humanitarian side of this country. If you look at what is taught to us, it's an advantage to white ideas. So if you go to the university as a Black student, as an example, there is violence to you. That violence comes in the form of not hearing anything about your history. As you pointed out, Angela, our history did not start with slavery, although it has come to define our life on this continent. Our history is erased as well. So the great traditions of our history are not taught, but instead, and it's not that, it's just that they are taught, something else is taught. And what is taught to us is privileging only primarily white ideas, so that Eurocentric ideas. So the impression that we leave with people is that those are the ideas worth knowing. That dance, African dance is always something different, but real classical dance is something about Europe, right? So we look at Picasso's paintings in Musée d'Orsay in Paris, and nobody really tells you that Cubism is coming from an African Congo tradition. Somebody once said, they love our culture, but they hate us. So much of us is either appropriated, lost, or completely erased. So that there is a privileging, so there's advantage, right? So one group is gaining the benefit on a daily basis by climbing on the backs of others. There are steps being provided for them to improve, for them, their children to feel proud of them, to know who they're coming from and where they're coming from and why they should be proud of themselves. So when we look at these institutions and we see them continue to be dominated, my own research shows that in British Columbia, when you look at the majority of institutions, when you look at the governance boards that run these institutions, only, and I want you to hear this, 13%, 13% on average are visible minorities. Forget about Black people being represented there. And this is in a city with a majority of what Canada calls visible minorities. And it doesn't matter, it's the same across this entire country, right? So we are being run, privileged by one group, and institutions continue to talk. They put out statements performatively. We stand. I will believe that when I see our people in the rightful positions of power, authority, and that our school systems are teaching this stuff, and that we are really truly getting the racial justice in these institutions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, justice. And you know, the part that we're at right now is to recognize that non-Black people in Canada are at the very, very, very beginning of beginning to think about what it means to center Blackness and to understand the role of Africa in the world at a very, 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 very beginning. And much of this conversation has come in part because of you know, Black Lives Matter and the role of policing and the relationship to policing and our subjugation. There is the very creation of police agencies in Canada and in other parts of the world, including the United States, was to be in direct opposition to our safety and to our security and to the policing was designed to subjugate us above others and exclusively. And here we are in the 20th century with a lot of police. And we're having a vital conversation now about policing and policing of Black lives, to use the title from Robin Maynard's brilliant book. I wonder if I could check in with you, Denise, about thoughts that you might have about policing. And
oh, well, yeah. I noticed recently with this movement, defund the police has been a new hashtag. And are you able to hear me? Is that okay? Oh, good. I've been researching and looking into what that would mean, and I really don't see the reason for police in modern society, because I've seen on a few interviews that the police actually only show up after something has happened. They're never there when and a crime is actually occurring. So there's not really any reason for police to be an actual entity. And also the police budgets are just astronomical right now. They're receiving so much money for not really doing anything but policing black and brown bodies. And it, yeah, that I don't see a real need for police. So definitely finding municipal entities to oversee different parts of policing would be a better idea than having a police in every major city or town. So those are my thoughts. Thank you, Angela.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. What comes to mind, Junie, in thinking about the policing and policing Black lives?
Yeah. Whew. I mean, I have to say, if we literally want to survive, we cannot have the police. The police, essentially, the police state, the military state, the legal enforcement, they've all been designed by this white supremacist structure. They've all been designed to actually, continue, in effect, our enslavement. I mean, there's a lot of scholarship on how the transition from slave catchers, bounty hunters, whatever, came from the direct line, or policing came as a direct line from that. There's a lot of course, erasure of that understanding here in Canada. But what I want folks to understand is that, the police state is here to protect, serve, and prop up the settler state. That's it. We need to disabuse ourselves of the notion that the police is here to protect anyone, and specifically Black and brown bodies. And so when we, in a time when we are in a housing crisis and a increased mental health crisis, where everyone is saying globally that that mental health is the next pandemic after COVID, or we're in the midst of it, police budgets are increasing exponentially. I mean, Vancouver Police Department's budget of 100 million increased from, I believe, 2010 to here 2020, where it's at 314 million. That's 1/5 of this. That's over 1/5 of the city's budget. And what we're seeing, what we're witnessing, is that policing, in fact, harms our lives, harms our communities. They're not here for us. So we need to divest ourselves from the police. That the police simply continue the tradition of enslaving, incarcerating Black bodies, funneling them into the system. And so here is our extra-legal and extrajudicial death happening by the state, and as sanctioned by the state through the police. So yeah, remove that, remove the police. This is not for us, it's not it.
Yeah, so Cicely, that's been a conversation that I know you had in examining policing and Blackness and abolition of policing. What are you noticing these days in this conversation right now, particularly for non-Black people, and that means and not Indigenous people would not be included in that, but non-Black people that are kind of like, wait, what?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard, and in fact, I would say impossible for a lot of folks, especially white folks, to imagine a world without policing, because, you know, the very foundation of the world that we live in, police, as Junie said, have been utilized for centuries to keep white people and only white people safe. And so for white folks and for some other non-Black folks, it's nigh impossible for them to imagine an alternate reality. Whereas for a lot of Black folks, we have been within our own communities creating safety measures, creating restorative justice processes, utilizing resources within our communities to maintain safety and protection when police have failed us. So I think it's very challenging for non-Black folks, especially white folks, to fathom that reality. But there's so much evidence coming forward, so many amazing things being written, so much scholarship, as Junie said, around the necessity of defunding police and redistributing that funding to other municipal services and support systems and communities. I think trusting communities to look after themselves in ways that they know how, and trusting communities to utilize city resources in a way that will protect them. Because one thing that's particularly important to me, is these conversations around like police involvement within marginalized communities. So we're in Pride, for example, and how I think a lot of folks don't realize that in some way or another, all marginalized groups are being policed, are being surveilled, are being violated by an unfair legal system and an unfair justice system. And I think it's really crucial that we begin to have these conversations about the abolition of police as we know it.
Mm-hmm. So kind of people would consider that a radical thought, and everyone's trying to wrap their heads around that right now. What are you noticing, Natasha, about this, thinking about, taking, and welcome back, by the way. I know you stepped off for a sec. Welcome back. What do you think? The links.
Yeah, the things. So yes, I was transported back. Thank you, internet. So I feel like I'm just kind of jumping in, and I think that my answer, which may be for many, is that I am so curious about this conversation. I think that learning and the alternatives to policing are so exciting. So when I hear Cicely say, that this restoration process can happen, and that and that having communities be able to restore themselves and take care of one another, to me just resonates in a way that even with my own learning, and I think that even sitting on this panel today, is that the learning and unlearning that we're doing in these conversations that we are now able to have is something, as a Black Canadian kid growing up here, that the silence that we didn't get to have these conversations around white supremacy, that there are other options, that we don't have to stop and believe that this is the only thing, is I think kind of what I want to talk about even in my own exploration of these conversations. And so the excitement that I feel when I'm seeing right now that defunding the police and that the conversation is happening, that is showing me that there's a shift, right? That we're not just saying this isn't okay, we're also saying this is how we need to be.
June, Francis, when we were, planning for today, you were like, yes, we have to talk about police and policing. So what are you thinking as you've been watching the conversation grow, and that there's and broaden, more people are having it and trying to wrap their heads around it? Why is this vital?
I think the answers that you got were very insightful. We know, and so in the interest of not repeating, I'll just say a few things. One is the police state has been there to protect white people, and certainly has not protected Black and Indigenous people. In fact, has created violence against us. So as Black people, this option of policing goes all the way back to its inception as a way to protect white settlers, right? So this whole institution was never designed to protect all of us, for sure. And it has never acted that way. And believe it when it doesn't, because it was never designed to do that. And this is one of those situations where my mind was drifting to the variety of other options that exist in the world. I was thinking about the Rwandans and the way, and looking at, here is Rwanda, that because of colonization and a history of division, ended up in a genocide where people with dark skins were killing each other. But the root of that, the root was set in colonization. The stage was set for that. And then as they came out of that, they realized that that system of policing has not worked for them. That it worked against all of them. And then that created the conditions that they were now in enmity, having killed a million people in 100 days, up to almost. So we then saw where they came together in the Gassia system, and I don't speak Kinyarwanda, so it's probably pronounced wrong, but they came with this alternative system where they brought elders together. They used a system that was used for conflict resolution and for restoration, and they brought people together. And it's not that there is like one big happy kumbaya at this moment, but they have emerged as a more cohesive country. They are building, they're model. One of the things, if you look at gender equality in Rwanda, one of the top in the world, they have a system now. Once a month they go out and their community gather to clean up the community. And we have this system that actually was what they had to revert to solve conflict, to reduce tension, and to bring restitution. So there are many models, many alternatives. And I'm just hoping that we look beyond these boundary and Eurocentric ideas to the broader Black community, because we have something to say here as to alternatives.
Mm. And the liberation struggle, the effort, the work, on an individual level, on a relational, in our communities, and then with the broader society. And as we're building on what's already happening, the teachings that we have, the ones that we're relearning or learning, it is thinking about how then we are in this time where there is a lot of people that are really interested in anti-Black racism and are doing things, behaviors. I know we saw some folks kneeling with kente cloth on Twitter. We've seen a number of statements come out. We're seeing all these behaviors, which could be performative. What do we make about this? All these actions, all these behaviors that we're seeing in the media and social media, and in terms of statements. I saw somebody say, something about the industrial statement industry is something that we need to stop. Where are we at? What's going on with the performative, seemingly actions that we're noticing here? Is it good?
You want me? I wasn't sure.
Anybody, just jump in. I know I'm going to open it up.
So I just spoke, so I was going to defer. But since
we'll go ahead.
I think why don't I defer? But I'd like to come back at it.
Okay, great. What do you think, Dr. Brown? The mic. It's always the thing about muting and unmuting. It's so it's the.
Yes. I want to tie up a couple of loose ends here.
Mm.
When we're talking about white supremacy, as far as I'm concerned, there are nuances here. If we look at the 1910 Canadian census, it's online. You can see how the population of Canada was classified according to skin color.
Mm.
And it established a hierarchy down, and at the bottom of the pile are Black people, and all the other colors, the yellow, the brown, and whatever, are up and up, and they all kick downwards when it comes to Black people. So white folks are not the only one who are guilty of anti-Black racism.
For sure.
Okay, so I think we need to pay attention to that, because some of the most virulent encounters I've had when I did multiculturalism was coming from brown people.
Yeah.
And I have to say that publicly.
Mm-hmm.
And when I then look back and look at the history of colonization of the continent and the Caribbean, they were brought when slavery was abolished to these places, and they were told that they were better than the lazy, worthless Black people, and they were set a rung above, and they became the buffer between the white folks at the top and the Black folks at the bottom. So
the managerial class.
Huh?
The managerial class.
Yes, so we got to watch the movements of those folks in the system. Now, in terms of, we need to be reminded that in Canada, the express purpose was to settle Canada as a white man's country. It was stated, it was enacted in law. And the same was said for the United States, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, okay? So there is that, the population, the way they've designed it. And racism as an ideology was invented by who we've learned, their Enlightenment philosophers. So it's a real big project here. When it comes to the performative stuff that's happening right now, some of it is so fake. I have to say, guys, and I know people are going to give me a thing for this. I love our Prime Minister. I was his advisor at one time. Lovely young man. But when I see him taking a knee, I had to look somewhere else. Somehow, it didn't jive with a few days earlier when a reporter asked him what he thought of the happenings south of the border. And how many seconds did it take him to respond? Even Al Sharpton had it as part of his sermon. You know, so some of this performative thing is like, it's good for business now. So all of these firms who were not hiring Black people, or when they hire them, were putting them in low life positions, etc. Are not, this righteous indignation at the moment really doesn't ring with an authenticity for me, you know, because we've been in this wilderness for years, nearly 200 years since slavery was abolished. And these people were on our necks, on our backs, on our bellies. And now you're going to take a knee? I'm sorry, guys. You know, it's been very difficult for me. I have to say to everybody, it's been difficult for me. It's been difficult.
Mm-hmm.
It's been difficult to try to be scholarly about this stuff, but also some of this stuff came with the birth of where I was born, in the former colony of Jamaica, and the relationship to this whole thing. And the last thing I want to say on this is that, you see, the policing, that's only one small part of the whole coercive machinery. There is if we take the plantation as a model, there was a plantation militia made up of white men and mixed race men. Then there was a state or provincial militia. Then there was the National Guard. And then there is this army over. And when you look across, when I see the images across the border right now with the demonstrations and the reaction and the instruction coming from the White House to dominate, it reminds me of the slave rebellions when that kind of brute force was brought out from every corner, including gunboats in the harbor. and the British Navy. So the police is kind of like the front line of this hierarchy of force in the interest, as you all have been saying rightly, to protect the property and persons of white settlers. So thank you for the opportunity to put my 2 cents worth in. I have written a book. It's not that I'm selling, but the way I realized I could have spent 39 years in the British Columbia system working very hard, and it could be that I never existed. So I decided to write myself in the history. And it's the same for all of you doing this great work. Please create your own archives and see to it that you store your stuff. Because so often young people come to want to do research and they say there is nothing. And then the wider community say, what do you guys ever do? You know? So please pay attention to the archives. I know Lama Mugabo, that young man, has for many years been documenting and trying to get things into the archive. I think you need to establish your own historians to gather the materials and get a place in the archives, the official archives, to file some of these things, because you're doing very, very important work. Thank you.
That's part of the liberation struggle and how we continue to move ahead and take action. That's a brilliant advice. Yeah, what do you think, Natasha? And welcome back. Welcome back. The performative versus transformative. We're talking about behaviors and what.
Oh, my favorite. Oh, my favorite. This is my favorite. I'm glad that I came back for it the second time. Yeah, that exploration around performative, and I probably missed a bit, but you know, I'm really seeing it in these last couple of weeks push back around this isn't enough. And I find that even in my work as an activist, and that has been over the last 10 years within the labor movement, is that we only get to a certain point and then we're stopped. When we start to talk about leadership, when we start to think about, okay, how do we create leaders? How do we make sure that they are getting into the conventions and conferences so that they can become leaders, about the access, that we're still stuck. We're at that place where we now need to stop writing it in and be able to make it dynamic. And when we get into these transformative conversations, this is where you get to brainstorm, where we get to be able to really talk about, and I can't wait to sit down, and sometimes I get to do it with my clients and say, okay, let's talk about dismantling this. What is it really going to look like? And what I'm hoping is that as we shift into this age of accountability, and that the accountability is where we start to hold these conversations, that transformation gets to happen. But I think that when we talk about the restorative work, and it's been in pieces when we're talking about liberations and different cultures, is that we must start to do that restorative work. And I know that as a conflict resolution specialist, it is about using those conflict resolution tools, like even how you've asked that nobody comment, that you actively listen. I have been in spaces where we have asked people not to center themselves, and it is the hardest thing to do. This practicing not centering ourselves, that the narrative always becomes about I and me, and that our stories automatically get silenced. When we start to practice transformative ways and restorative ways, that we actually get to sit and hold space, to have the conversations that we need to have to create the sustainable shift. And what I'm seeing happen when we talk about performative and moving into the transformative is that we have to move away from the reaction, and we need to be proactive, and to understand that being proactive means taking the time, means, and this is where I'm going to talk about money, and I already talked about it today, but you need to be able to put into the budgets as an organization enough money yearly that doesn't mean it's a half-day training on unconscious bias, right? That when we talk about building inclusive organizations, when I am working with organizations who are doing this transformative work, I look at the consultants that they've brought together, dynamic people of color, people who are wanting to do this work, this restorative work, and that they're being paid to actually do the work. And I think that that is this biggest piece, that we are all about the talk in all of these industries. And what we're being right now is we're being called out for it. And I'm thinking, is this going to make our work as activists, as leaders, easier? And how do we do that? Because I think that also, in order to do this work, we can't do it alone. And that also becomes part of this transformation piece of really being able to celebrate one another, to create the time and space, and even to expand time, to be able to have these conversations in a way that it centers anti-oppression in a transformative way, that we as the practitioners doing this work can continue to do the work. Because I have to say that if it doesn't continue to be transformative, I don't know how long we can continue to do it in the way that we've been doing it.
Mm. So that's a lot about the individual and then within organizations. And I know, June, we've had these conversations about, systemic work and the challenge of that in institutions and how resistant to change these systems are. I mean, we're talking about the roots of oppression and the roots of white supremacy, the roots of anti-Black racism are literally baked in to the fabric and all the systems and aspects of Canada. So though we are doing individual action on a daily basis, when we bump up against the institutions and the systems, and here we are, June 8th, 2020, with performative, a lot of behaviors. What's going to happen right now? Where are we at in terms of redressing the structures of power and oppression that are, as Dr. Brown said, foot on our neck?
Yeah, how do we get it off? I want to use an example to illustrate what this looks like in practice. So many of you who are not from British Columbia or from Vancouver may not know, but I think most of you do know about the Hogan's Alley Society and the Hogan's Alley initiative here. The city of Vancouver, there was the quick version of it is a Black community lives in Vancouver, thriving. Most of you wonder, really? Are there really Black people in British Columbia? Well, here's a story. They're displaced because of the direct racist actions of the city, who have done, this is done across Canada and North America. Where we became, as soon as we started to gather and make a future for ourselves and our businesses, and I heard that, I think it was Natasha who talked about her parents having met at Vi's Chicken Shop in Vancouver. Why was that? Because her father was Black and her mother is white, and this was a place they could go. So these businesses are thriving, but they're more than anything else creating a support, a launch pad for the Black community. And the city comes in, and this was done across whether it's the burning of Black Wall Street, in came a variety of actions, including putting in the Georgia Street Viaduct, which was a final nail in the coffin. But before that, there are a variety of steps. They stop delivering stuff to the Black community and they make it a blight, okay? So fast forward, they're bringing these viaducts down. And I know Angela was at this first meeting and could tell you reams about it. But the city, of course, by now has completely erased us, right? So as far as they're concerned, besides Jimi Hendrickson, Hendrix, I always get this wrong, there is no Black community to answer to. But they forgot that the activists, Angela, Variety, Stephanie Allen, Wade Compton, a variety of Black activists here, held them to account. Antonia, a bunch of other people. I wasn't there, but I hear the story and reminded the city that where is the redress? But what we found was even in the words they used, they could not even speak to us without being racist. Because you see, when they turn to us and say, we want you to be included to make it vibrant, okay? They couldn't figure why we reacted to that. Because of course, Black people are only there for that, okay? We get to be the window dressings for them. We as long as we're the Aunt Jemima figures, we're benign and they can include us. And of course, we'll include you on the doorsteps. But the Black community said, no, no, no. And we formed resistance. And the resistance, for the first time ever, we have embedded ourselves in the Northeast Falls Creek Plan. And the city has written a reconciliation and cultural redress chapter. You would think we're done, we've won, we're ready. Because now they have publicly acknowledged that they will work with the Black community. For 2 years, they have stalled. 2 solid years, we have not even gotten a memorandum of understanding from the city of Vancouver. It's always a reason. It's always a reason. But we know fundamentally, they did not intend to change. They were performative. It was fine to have various activities. So they won an award, by the way. They were quick to put together something to win an award for this. But to actually make the change and turn over this block to Black people, well, that was not really their plan. So it's performative. And to bring to a close, what I'm trying to say here is, these are resistance systems. They're built to survive. So these performative acts are just to ensure their survival, so there's no revolution, right? They do just enough to keep us there, so we don't actually come at them. So when they say that they stand in solidarity, it gives them 5 more minutes to figure out something else. And the final thing is, I know you stumbled over this, but we've done some work through the Collaboratorio at Simon Fraser and Peru and other things.
Laughing at my Spanish.
And that is because we absolutely recognize that, in fact, we need to invent new things, right? The laboratorio. And the second thing we work to do is decenter. Natasha talked about it. So I say we need to move them out of the center, because actually they're clogging up the center. So when they invite you in, there is no way you can get in, because they're not letting you in and they have clogged up the center. So we talk about decentering this. But the point is that until the people like us are at the center leading this change, until they're bystanders listening to us, because they have not solved it, they don't know how. That's what I've learned. They don't know where to go. We are the ones that need to be brought into this conversation in order to move from this performative BS, right? That's angering all of us, into transformative change.
Yeah, Cicely, you're taking action, and then you're watching this stuff, performative versus transformative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add to that, but absolutely, just things like the recent Black Square thing on Instagram and that how that was supposed to be a thing really kind of speaks to how so many people are just missing the mark, are just doing these performative pieces, and there's no follow-up. Just looking in the position that I'm in, where people are getting in touch for anti-racism training and consulting and things like that, and how yeah, I'm so curious to see if this will last, if this will be sustainable, if people will still be interested in a few months from now, or if it's just a phase. And that performative element is really frustrating.
Mm. And as we were thinking about our liberation and continuing our struggle and the front line and taking action and moving from this point, and I can't ignore the role of the Black poet and the role of our action in art and in the written word. And I know Junie, as a poet and as a writer, you know, we lean on the arts and our poetry and our those that are creating art and showing in this way our lived experiences. How will that assist us in our furthering our liberation from this point forward?
Yeah, I mean, yes, I'm a poet, I'm a writer. This is how, I mean, I use writing to, you know, for lack of a better word, write my existence, you know, bring myself forward, birth myself into this place. Um, and you know, many poets have said, including Yvonne Brown and other poets who are Black and of color, have said that, you know, the role of writers, of poets, is to talk about the truth, to bring the truth to the forefront. And you know, I do believe that our liberation, the struggle for liberation, we do this by any means necessary and with all the tools that we have available, and writing is one of them. You know, one of the things, and I actually have a collection coming out this fall. One of the pieces I write about, you know, it is exhausting writing about this stuff. It is exhausting to write from a perspective of challenging your belief of my ontological, you know, arrival of where I am. But I also believe that we can use this space, you know, writing to write to our liberation, to write to joy, and that you know, in the midst of all this difficulty, all you know, I'm gonna keep my language neutral and and not spicy, but amidst all this stuff that is going on, we have to find beauty and joy. And I'm not saying this from a kumbaya or let's forget about it. That's not what I'm saying. But we have to privilege and prioritize our survival. We do. The state's not going to do it. Other people aren't going to do it. We have to do it. And arts, writing, our performances for ourselves and not as co-opted by, you know, by the larger white supremacist culture, is that space to provide that healing, that joy, that, you know, all of those things that we need to assure and ensure our survival and our resilience. And it is important that we are aware how we often get used, you know, for our performativity, for our words, for whatever it is, as performance, but not really as a way to actually appreciate and center our art or our words. I don't think I have more to say other than, you know, one of the things I've been noticing amongst all the performative things is people are saying, read more Black writers, read, you know, yes, absolutely read more of what we're writing. But also, it's not, please don't circulate lists of what we should be reading without you also reading these things and critically engaging in these things. And the last thing I want to say is that one of the things that is heartening is hearing folks, you know, on social media committing to, you know, sitting in reading groups to analyze and critically discuss writing, scholarship, and poetry by Black folks. And so I'm hoping that in this moment that it's not, you know, we're not a fad, that our words, our work, our art that we create continues to be both a point of liberation for us, but also a point of revealing truth to the larger community or world. So yeah, writing, art, it's important for our survival.
Thank you, Junie. And guess what, everyone? We are out of time. I'd like to ask everyone that's viewing right now to join me in thanking this incredible group of people who've shared their brilliance and insights into Black life, into anti-Black anti-Black racism and organizing against anti-Black racism, and also sharing of their time in this evening. And I want to thank each and every one of you for convening together today and this day, June 8th, 2020, at this point in time, this vital conversation. And I'm looking forward to continue this work and this conversation as we stay on this front line, redressing the historic oppression and the disrupting power, and meeting our co-conspirators toward a future that is that disrupts and transforms what has happened in our past. It's not going to be easy, and we will continue to season and strengthen and sharpen our analysis and our strategy. And I'm excited to continue this with each and every one of you. Thank you so much for being here today. Cicely Blain, Dr. Yvonne Brown, Dr. June Francis, Junie Désil, Denise Fraser, and Natasha Tony. As everyone exits today, thank you for joining, and you'll be directed to a page where there are interviews, there's readings and organizations that you can support right now and in the future. This is, we're in this and for a long haul. And we ask that you subscribe to Feminist Delivers email updates. You'll get information about that. And then to follow Feminist Deliver and all of the panelists on their social media channels.
Angela, I'd like to say thank you very much for organizing and for moderating and for being so tolerant and being able to bring the dots together across the various points of view. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure, and we're not done. We're not done, people. I'm so excited for all that's next. Thank you. And for the panelists, I know we might be able to convene after.